Good evening, everyone. My name is Donald Wine of the American Outlaws, and I would like to welcome you to the second of our VP candidate forums featuring candidates for U.S. Soccer Vice President. And as part of our continuing United for Progress efforts, we are bringing you question and answer sessions with each of the candidates contesting for the position of Vice President, which will be voted on at U.S. Soccer's annual general meeting on February 27th. Last night, we had Tim Turney, Vice Chair of U.S. Youth Soccer, and right now, as you can see, I am pleased to introduce Cobi Jones. In addition to being a candidate for U.S. Soccer Vice President, you obviously all know Cobi Jones as a legend of the U.S. men's national team and a member of the National Soccer Hall of Fame. He is also a soccer analyst and is part owner of Angel City FC, which enters the NWSL next year. Cobi, welcome, and thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. More than happy to be here.
Great. And before we get started, for everyone out there who didn't see last night's, all potential questions are the result of dozens of questions submitted by AO members, and potential questions were given to the candidate in advance, though I do reserve the opportunity to follow up based on any answers are given. At the end of this hour, we will leave some time for Cobi to give you all a little closing statement. But Cobi, I do want to begin in an area that has been in the forefront of your campaign, and that is diversity and inclusion. And I want to begin this first question, which comes to us from Kendrick from AO Omaha. I want to begin by quoting from your statement when you announced your candidacy. You said, yes, representation and access will inform all that I do. Increasing representation and access at every level of U.S. soccer will grow our game in all its forms and allow the diversity of thought necessary to make U.S. soccer better for us all. What can U.S. soccer do under your leadership to become more inclusive and more specifically reach out to Black and brown communities across the United States?
Well, thanks for the question first. Thanks for having me. I think there's a lot that U.S. soccer can do. Now, if I do get elected to the position, I am serving at the pleasure, as they like to say, with the other members of the board and with Cindy as the president. What I would try to do and what I would like to do is find ways to reach out to the different communities. When I look at U.S. soccer, I look at it from the top down and the bottom up, any way you want to look at it, right? I look at the board itself. I don't see a Black face on the board. I don't see that representation there. And that what I mean when I say representation matters, I'm talking about it's important for people to be able to associate and kind of relate to the people that are in charge. I always talk about for myself that I did not see another Black face in a position of quote unquote power as a coach, as a member of staff, or an owner of a team until I was 19 years old. Now, mind you, that's me being in college when I saw Clive Charles as the head coach up in Portland. And that was a moment for me. That was something special where I was like, oh, there are Black people that are playing soccer, that are involved in the game at higher levels. And so what I would like to do at the higher levels when we're talking about U.S. soccer is to be a symbol, I guess, to a degree, but also when I'm talking about, representation, I'm also, there's one more part that I probably should have said, representation, access, but also advocacy, to advocate for that too. Because if I'm just sitting there and just going, I made it, that's not enough. I need to actually push the envelope a little bit and say, can we get other people of color, people from different backgrounds and different thought patterns, different, growing up differently than the rest of us, to give us a different view on how to look at problems. And I only think that can help U.S. soccer. Why do we think that when we talk about the actual presidency of the United States, do we have, this changing of the guard, so to speak, and different people coming in? So we can look at things a little bit differently. And I'd like to be part of that process at the top. When we're talking about the bottom, or we're talking about the youth level, so to speak, when we're talking about the grassroots, how can we make that tent broader, bringing more people into the game of soccer? What I would like to do is, like, one of the examples is to continue upon the Innovate to Grow Fund and bring best practices within, that fund and how it's being used. Now, it's not just about U.S. soccer giving subsidies, to bring people of color into the games. That's fantastic, and I think that's great. But can we do more? I've talked to one association. What they've done, they've actually hired on someone that actually knows the problems at the local community and knows the issues within the local community to reach out, and has actually brought more membership clubs and players into their organization, which in turn, with the fees and everything that are due, has actually allowed that fund to last longer and actually be better and bring more people into the game. Because what happens in upstate New York, as I like to say, is not the same thing that is going to work in San Diego, California. So you have to give the resources necessary to the different associations, the different groups, to allow them to implement in the best way possible. And that's something that I would like to do.
A follow-up to that, leading into my next question, it came from Drew here in AODC. He wanted to know what diversity and equity meant to you. And it's clear that you have a unique perspective. So I'll ask this. You mentioned that, there's not a lot of faces that look like ours on the board or in these positions of power. If you walk in, it would be one extra one. How do you be the tide that lifts all ships? How do you be the one that's the diversity and inclusion make that the forefront when you are the only one in the room?
Right. I think a lot of it is kind of what I mentioned or alluded to it earlier is I would like to advocate, for others. And look, I don't think when we go into this room that everyone's just like, mind, and this is the only way it's going to be. I think especially at this point in time, there's a more of a willingness and an openness and an understanding that by quite a few people that we do need to open up this game more and make it more inclusive to others, not only people of different color, but different sex, different thought, as I talked about. Also, let's not forget, there's U.S. Soccer also has, within their, I guess, U.S. Soccer talks about soccer in all its forms, right? And that's important too, that we not just think about, we're talking about the national team, and this, we have all these other different, groups that need to be included too. And I've looked at the 990 forum and where U.S. Soccer puts part of their money, but I think they could do that as well. They could do a little bit better. They've already given some grants to U.S. Deaf, but are there other groups out there that may want to join in and be a part of U.S. Soccer that also U.S. Soccer could help expand their tent as well to bring more people in? And these are just some of the ways. Now, being the only face in here, sometimes the answer is simple. You got to speak. You got to be in that room and you got to say, and then the onus is on the people in the room to look at themselves and say, are we going to actually make an effort to try to get things done in this way? I will continuously try to push, to see if we can get things done. That's part of the reason of why I wanted to do this. This is a volunteer position where I feel that I can affect some of that change, where I can be in the room and say, okay, can we look at these things different? Can we look at some of the other groups that are doing it? And I think I have the breadth of experience and association when we're talking about soccer over the last 30 plus years that I've been involved to say, hey, look at some of these other groups and what they're doing. Look, I have a relationship with the Nikes and the Adidases. Look what they're doing right now to try to expand the game and bring more representation and more inclusive nature. If they can do it, U.S. Soccer could probably step up and do it as well.
Absolutely. And you were talking about inclusion. That leads me to my next question, also coming from a member here, Erin in AODC. She wants to talk about equal pay. Obviously, that is something that's very much at the forefront of a lot of the governance of U.S. Soccer. Do you have a strategy to eliminate the institutionalized gender discrimination in U.S. Soccer? And what is your approach to ensure equal merited pay? And I will add to that, not just for the two main national teams, the men and the women, but also the extended national teams as well.
Yeah, I would like to see this, the equal pay at the extended national teams and all the way up to the full national team. I do not believe in a zero-sum game. I do not believe that if the women make more, the men are going to make less. And if the men make more, the women are going to make less, and so on. So for me, it's all about, okay, the big argument is, well, we're given different amounts of money for, the World Cup or the different events. Well, if we're going to talk, just for the women's team right now, I think that's a failure at U.S. Soccer right now. They're the world champions. There has to be a way where we could try to find a way to get more money, along the sides for the women's national team. But also, I would say with that particular instance, within the other extended national teams, I think U.S. Soccer needs to stand side by side, with the different groups and approach FIFA, approach the different groups that are putting money towards US soccer and say, look, we want to try to have a situation where there is an equal pay, throughout. Can we step up and do this? Now, look, I don't think there's any better time than now, as we are seeing different corporations, different organizations getting behind and supporting this, as they understand that there has been a big disparity for quite some time, for decades, and now's the time to step up.
I want to shift to, inclusion. You've talked about access, and I want to talk about fan accessibility and ticket prices. This is a couple of questions that are obviously very important to what members are looking for and what we as an organization do every single match. But this comes from David from AO San Diego. He asked, what is your plan to rebuild the fan base? And I'll preface that by saying, of course, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. We've been in it for about a year now. And through that, we haven't had a lot of games and we haven't had a lot of opportunities. And people have kind of fallen off the map. They've kind of said, well, when it's safe, I'll come back. What is your plan to kind of bring that fan base back and get them re-energized, especially with the Olympics and World Cup qualifying coming up?
Awareness. It's plain and simple. There needs to be more awareness. If we're talking about even going outside of the usual advertisements, of letting there be an awareness of what you just said. Olympics are coming up. We're going to be a part of that. World Cup is just around the corner. We're going to be hosting, in a few years. We can't wait, for the perfect situation where COVID is dead and buried and then say, okay, let's go now. That's too late. We can start planning now and start pushing things out. I'd like to start saying, okay, can we put advertisements out there and saying, okay, can we do more, within the game, be involved in the game more, so that not only are you, starting to play the game, but you're starting to gear up and get ready for the World Cup that's going to be hosted here in the United States. The Olympics are right around the corner. It truly is just a simple thing of awareness and letting people know that, like, hey, this is a game that we all love, that we all support, and that if we need to make sure that we start tackling the issues of the lack of participation due to COVID right now by just getting it in people's minds that, hey, can we start playing? And look, I know this is a big problem, because we are also talking about different states with different opening, different ways of opening and different timing of opening, to be quite frank. But I think the least we could do is start pushing that awareness from a marketing side and start to putting marketing dollars behind not only the Olympics and everything that we have and the different individual players that are making the game exciting for all the fans once again, but let's see if we can put more out there, even at the youth level, saying, hey, can we get involved? Because this sport that you're participating in or that your friends love to play in, it's starting to really gear up and it's starting to get really exciting over the next couple of years.
And along those lines, we'll take COVID out of the equation, because for this next question is pretty much unfair. But before COVID,
you cut out for a second there. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I said this next question deals with venue selection. Can you hear me?
Maybe it's me.
Can you hear me? Raise your hand if you can hear me.
Okay, now I can hear you. There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that. No, we have it's Zoom.
New world.
It's a new world. So I want to take COVID aside for a second, because as I mentioned, this next question is kind of unfair for that, but we're dealing with venue selection and the timing of the announcing of matches. A lot of people who have families want these matches to be announced earlier so that they can properly plan for it. So what steps can you take, or even the board take, to help that in the future and announce these matches a little bit earlier so that families can choose to attend games and make that decision earlier, especially when other federations seem to be, at least to the untrained eye or to the outside world, they seem to be scheduling their games months in advance so that their fans already know where they're going to be, even if they don't know who they're going to be playing.
Well, I would love to have the announcements as early as possible. I would go in there and try to figure out exactly why it takes so long, for U.S. soccer to announce where the games are going to be and when, because we do want to have a proper buildup. I think that's the smartest thing. The longer out that you have, you can have a proper buildup. And I would love to have the opportunity, to go in there and say, hey, can we give an extra month? Because that gives us that time where we can work with the local communities that are there. We can work with the local state associations and the local club teams that are within the area, because that's where you're going to get the most support from. Those are the ones that are going to want to be a part of this game and want to support their team. So for me, it's about, okay, can we, try to lock down, venues and sites as early as possible, where we can, when we can, and get the word out at all the different, all the different soccer resources around the country and the different groups that are involved in U.S. soccer, to make sure that the local communities there, no, it's not just about people flying in and everything and seeing the game. That's always exciting, but it's about the locals that are there in that region that really put the numbers up and make the game, what it is.
And the final question in this segment, obviously, getting families, getting youth teams and youth organizations to get to the game requires to have affordable tickets. And for a lot of fans, these tickets aren't affordable, making them have to make decisions between whether bringing a family of 4 or a family of 1 or even 0. So what does the federation see this as an issue, or at least do you see this as an issue, given you're not necessarily in a federation yet? And what would you do to address that issue so that fans can get to games?
Well, this is a question that goes beyond just soccer, right? It's the nature of sports where the demand, all of a sudden the prices increase. But I would love to see if U.S. soccer can work out a way where we have some type of family discounts, where there are, especially for if we're talking about partnering up with the local resources or the local associations, to give those discounts out to the families, where you can bring a family of 4 and it doesn't cost over $150, to go to a game, when you're talking food and parking and all these different things. I would love to see if we could do that at various venues, across the country, and with different games, not just the quote unquote second tier games, but also, some of the top tier games, so people can really fall in love with the sport, So I like you said, I'm not in there yet to know what the exact issues are there, but I would love to see if we could tackle that and bring some of the prices down and make it affordable and exciting for the fans.
I want to go shift a little bit to governing structure of the federation. Obviously, you spoke passionately about diversity and inclusion. It seems like that'll be a centerpiece of what you hope to bring to the board. But in your first year, given that we have 1 year from now until next year, when there will be a full presidential election, what would you work with Cindy Parlow-Cone, the current president, to do? What would be a tangible change that would be your priority, other than the diversity inclusion aspect that you spoke about earlier?
Well, like you said, the diversity inclusion is a huge part of it, but I would also try to look at the governance of U.S. soccer. When we're talking within the governance of U.S. soccer, about how the business side of U.S. soccer, about, U.S. soccer takes in quite a bit of money. And I have looked at the Form 990 already, and look, the fiduciary side of it, fantastic, that's all done. They have accountants that take care of all of that. But I would like to look at some of the other areas of where U.S. soccer is spending their money. And we talked about the extended national teams a bit. Can we give more support in those areas within the extended national teams? I think would be fantastic. I think that's extremely important. Can we see where U.S. soccer, not only how they are spending their money, but like I said, where? And if we're getting the most value, out of every dollar, that would be one of the biggest areas that I would look to look into, is to just say, make sure that we're spending right, that money's being spent correctly within the organization, because it's a fact of life with anyone in business. There's always some type of waste, and I would like to see if we could go over that and see if there's better ways, to try to put our funds.
And pardon me, as I live in a major metropolitan city and an ambulance rolls by, but I did want to continue with that, because the federation obviously has decisions that are made. They have insight, and you may have further insight into, as you join the federation, you have further insight into how some of these decisions are made. But I know fans don't have that access. So how would you move the federation towards a system that'll allow the fans to fully understand some of the processes behind these governing decisions?
Well, I think, as as COVID has come, a lot of things have changed, right? And we're able to communicate a lot more over Zoom and different areas like this, So I would, put forward, that possibly if we could have these types of meetings where you have different groups, different supporters groups, that are open to the public, where we could have a little bit more of an open discussion where it's just like, okay, this is exactly what's going on within US soccer, right now, and just have to allow the fan the opportunity to come in and put some of their questions, to the forefront, and then allow some of the members of US soccer to come in and talk with the fans. I'm not a big believer in having just like this complete separation of the haves and, oh, we're this and you're not, so just take it and listen. No, it's like, I would like to listen to the different groups, because the fans and the different members, associates of US soccer, they're the ones that make up US soccer. US soccer is not the board and the people the business side of it. It's all the member groups and all the fans that are a part of it that make up US soccer. So I think it's worthwhile listening to some of the different groups. Now, I also understand on the flip side, it can't be like, okay, yeah, we're meeting once a week and this is what's happening, but if there's something that happens, once or twice a year, where you can just have an update of where US soccer stands, if it's a State of the Union outside of the AGM, that would make sense to me.
With the board and just with the federation as a whole, there's obviously the relationship between the federation and the various professional leagues. NWSL, obviously, you're going to be well familiar with that in a year when your team enters the league. But how do you work as a federation with these leagues? Because a lot of people, of course, they want, some people want promotion relegation. Some people just want stability between the teams and the leagues. How do you work with these professional leagues or work alongside them to keep some of these teams together, ensure prosperity and growth of some leagues, especially on the women's side, and make it so that our pyramid is more stable?
Well, I think it's the job of US soccer, to give that support, in any way that it can. If it's just, support as far as the business side, as far as relations of bringing people into the different clubs and organizations within NWSL, MLS, USL, any of the professional leagues, I think that's important. I think if it's financial support, I think that is important as well. And I have been asked many a time, should US soccer continue to support the NWSL? And my response is of course. They supported, MLS, at the beginning. MLS started because of US soccer and everything, the benefits of the World Cup here in the United States. So I say without a doubt, we can continue to support, to try to, like you said, stabilize, not just individual clubs, but the league itself, to make sure that there is opportunity for men, for women to continue to play the game at the highest levels, throughout. I think that's extremely important. But that also goes, I know we're just talking about, the professional leagues, but I'd also say on the other side, if we can continue and find ways to support and make the game more relevant, we're talking about the adult, as well. We're talking about the US Open Cup, making that more intriguing so we can have a broader base of teams, join in and get rewarded for success. I think these are some of the things that, US soccer could do to just kind of not only support the individual groups, but also just make soccer more exciting, at every level.
You mentioned the U.S. Open Cup. I wasn't going to ask this question, but a nice follow-up that popped into my mind. Of course, just a couple of days ago, they decided to revamp it for 2021 in light of the pandemic and shrinking the number of teams that would be eligible to play. And of course, there's going to be quite a few teams that are eligible for the tournament that won't get to participate in it. How do you work with these leagues? And I'm sure it has a lot of factors involved, but how do you work with these leagues to give that the status and the stature that you see from the league cups in other nations?
Yeah, look, I think you got kind of touching on what you said, some teams that would have been a part of aren't going to be part of it now. I think one thing we have to remember, this is a pandemic that's, I'm hoping is once in a generation, right? So this year we're hoping, at least I'm hoping, is out of the ordinary. So when we're talking about in the future of the US Open Cup, or what some of the things that I would love to see, I would love to see the game, to see it expand in a way that there's more interest in it. And what do I mean by that? If we could find and work with the with the U.S. Cup, find ways to make it more exciting, see if we can find a partner, like a television partner, which would bring more money into it, see if we can find some financial backing as a sponsorship to bring that into it. All of a sudden you get more money, so you could spread the money out as far as the levels that you reach. And that makes it more exciting. I think it would be very interesting where you have more of a matchup, where you have those Cinderella stories where a team is playing, the Columbus Crew, in one of the rounds. And then all of a sudden, Columbus Crew is traveling to someplace, and I don't know, whatever your local team is. And all of a sudden, what does that give? That gives an influx of interest within the game locally. That gives a lot of attention to the game locally, and that helps build the game. So I think that's one of the ways that it just helps the sport in and of itself. I think when we're talking about the tail end of the U.S. Cup, we're talking about the last few rounds. If we could shorten that into a window, if it's 2 or 3 weeks, all of a sudden you start looking at, storytelling, right? Which makes it more interesting. All of a sudden you're just like, oh, look at this Cinderella story. And it gets told once, and then it just doesn't die on the vine as the next game is 2-3 months away. All of a sudden, no, they're playing on the weekend or they're playing that following week. Then all of a sudden you can build up the stories of the teams and the individuals and the coaches. And that just brings more attention, to US Cup. It brings more attention to other levels of the game within US soccer. And it brings more attention to these local communities, which I think is important all the way around.
Last question on the pyramid. Do you think that we're close to having a U.S. Open Cup on the women's side, given that the NWSL is obviously experiencing some growth? You have the W League, and now the USL is trying to start a women's league in the next year or so.
I would love to see it. I just don't know how long or fast that will come to fruition. But I think, without a doubt, I would love to see that, to have an Open Cup. Look, I love the Cinderella story. I love cheering for the underdog, so for me, I think that would be great. And I think as I said before, it helps build the game when people can get excited about cheering for a team to do something that wasn't expected. So if we can have that on the women's side and I think that's what the Open Cup kind of gives, because you have these pairings, that can make it more exciting. I would love to see that happen, for the women.
That's great. And I want to use that to kind of shift, because a lot of these professional leagues are dealing with academies, they're dealing with youth development. And a lot of our questions have come in the area of youth development. So we're going to shift there. And the first one comes from Michael from A.O. Bakersfield. And he writes, do you believe the Federation is doing enough to support the numerous youth organizations throughout the entire country? And will you do more to make it a priority?
Well, I think the Federation is doing what it can. I think the Federation needs to do something different. I think one of the things, a lot of the issue is what was asked in the question. There's so many different organizations now. When you're talking about US Club, USYS, ECL. You have all these different groups and organizations that are coming together, within US soccer. And it's like, how do we know which is the right path, I guess is something that everyone keeps asking me, which is the right path? And parents are so confused about where to go. And there's a lot of fighting between the disparate organizations on what's going on. I think this is where, and this is a big problem. It's a major problem, and it's an issue that will not get solved overnight, right? But it is about bringing the different groups together and see if we can find ways for the groups to kind of be in their lane. And by being their lane, I mean making an understanding amongst the groups of what we want to give for the youth, where we want the youth to go at the different levels, understanding that there is a premier, that there is more of a recreational play. And we have to understand that there needs to be some type of separation there, because what works for the elite athlete doesn't always work for the person that's just playing at the recreational level. And an example of that is when we saw the situation, the mandate from US Soccer about changing the date, changing the dates of birth for a competition. And all of a sudden you had a lot of recreational athletes going, well, I'm not playing with my friends anymore. So these are a lot of issues, that it's going to take the leaders of each of those organizations to come together. And it might not be a pretty conversation, and it could get ugly, but there needs to at least be the discussion. Now, I've heard that there was meetings of this that took place in the past, you know, and they kind of died off for a bit, but I would love to try to get that back on the table and have the different people, different heads talking to each other to see if we can find out a way to kind of, you know, work things out and come together. Because if we can, if we're working together, it expands the game. And it's almost like we were talking about with like the financial situation. You bring more people into it, and then all of a sudden everyone starts adding more and more players, you know, and then there's less concern about all the various interactions, I'll say, between the organizations.
Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of questions about pay to play, and I'll ask you this one that comes from Emil from AO Las Vegas. They ask, please describe your plan for improving access to player development and national team pathways, now primarily accessible only through expensive pay to play club programs. So I know the DA has kind of been shuttered, and that MLS and USL and other NISA have all started to kind of develop their academies. So how do you make it so that it's accessible and affordable for everyone who wants to have an opportunity to play?
Well, I think this is where I touch back on that Innovate to Grow Fund is one of the perfect examples of that. The pay to play, as bad as a rap as it's getting, it is funding quite a bit, you know, of soccer within this country. And the way I look at it is it's never going to completely go away. You know, it's going to be around, but can we find a way to build alongside of it? You know, and that's what I would like to do, to see if there are ways that we can give opportunities into those underserved communities, to have people that can be subsidized, you know, to come in, not only just individuals, but can we find ways to bring teams in or partner up with various organizations, you know, to come in? Can we find ways to bring into some of these groups, into U.S. Soccer, all these unaffiliated organizations? You know, that's probably one of the big parts, and make it more affordable for these organizations, you know, because if we can touch on the unaffiliated, bringing more numbers and show the benefits that they get of being a part of it, not only does, you know, the different organizations get more funding, but all of a sudden you start addressing that whole, you know, the diversity issue as well. You know, and then all of a sudden that gives more opportunities for different groups to be a part and move up that pathway. Now, going into the other part of as far as the pathway, that's kind of what, going back to the last question we talked about, that's about finding or explaining to the different groups or if not to the different groups, pardon me, but to the parents, which is the best way to get to where you want to go. I should put it out there, I'm also a believer that there's not just one way, you know, to success. When I was growing up, when I was playing, it was you played on your club team, you tried to make district, you tried to make state, you go to national. And that was like the one way that you got recognized. Now, I think now there's so many different organizations that there's a variety of different ways. I think there needs to be a better understanding for the parents of how this could possibly work. I think some of the other routes, you know, are welcome and open. If we're talking about, if you're going US club, if you're going USYS, you know, we have to understand that there's more than one way to be successful. What does that entail from US Soccer? I think it needs to be more of as far as the scouting needs to be intensified. So you're not just looking at certain areas and certain groups. You need to be willing to go into communities that you're not necessarily used to going into, or at least dealing with people that are already there, to find out, you know, where the success stories are there, and see if we can find a way to make it the pathways, you know, more open to those different individuals.
And there's been a follow-up question. There's been less emphasis on the college game. Obviously, MLS, the Super Draft used to be a great big deal, and now people view it as kind of an afterthought. They try to, you know, focus more on their academies and use that as kind of a supplemental draft at this point. But do you think that there's still avenues through college to get to the pathways that you need, or is it something where you feel that if a player wants to make it in Major League Soccer, USL, Europe, that they need to start with their academies and kind of go through that system?
No, I think that, like I said, I think there's more than one pathway, and I think college is an opportunity to actually grow as well. If you look at a lot of the players playing within MLS, quite a few of them are still in college. Look at some of the players that went overseas. A lot of them still came through college, because not only I'm not, like I said, many routes. You could go through the team's academies. I think that's great and that's fantastic, but do not just knock college as not being an opportunity, because I think you get different experiences, from college. I think you get an understanding of you're on your own and you're growing up, and all the responsibility falls upon you. Some of the things that you may not get at an academy if you are still living at home or you're still close to home. So there's different, like I've said many times, different pathways, but there's also different rates of growth, personal growth and understanding of the game that can make you a better person and a better player.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I think it ties into because the different perspective that you get from going to college, like you said, striking on your own and kind of learning how to do things on your own, leads to the next question that I have from Corinne from AO Memphis, and it deals with Americans going abroad. Specifically, as you know, there's a rule that they can't go abroad if they don't have a European passport until they turn 18. But obviously, we have kids that are turning professional earlier and maybe quote unquote ready to make that jump before they turn 18. Do you think it's U.S. Soccer's place to kind of advocate for those players who do want to go abroad before they turn 18 and try to, work with UEFA or other confederations to make that happen?
Well, I think U.S. Soccer should be working with UEFA and all the confederations regardless, and trying to make this as, as seamless as possible on what, the individual wants to do. I'm a big believer that the individual and the parents need to come together to make any type of decision like that. And if they can help, I think that is probably the best way to try to figure out if we can find a seamless transition, for individuals to go overseas. Now, it's not for everyone. We got to remember that going overseas isn't for everybody. Regarded, Landon Donovan, regarded one of the best soccer players in U.S. history, went overseas, quite a few times, but he didn't do that until he was later on in his career.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen that too. We've seen guys, go over as late as, 28, 29, 30, because that was how their career ended up going. And that's totally fine. But I think a lot of people obviously have that question about the young kids before they get to a point where they're allowed to go over.
Yeah, I think, look, this is, I'm a believer in the individual's responsibilities as far as the individual's rights, as far as the parents and the kids need to try to work out what's best for them. Because like I said, and what works in New York doesn't work in San Diego. I think what works for me isn't going to work for you, and that's where I think U.S. Soccer should try to be supportive, because it's not always going to be the same, the same situation for everybody. So I would like to see U.S. Soccer be supportive, in the individuals making decisions.
So we have a couple questions left here, and they're in the area of coaching and referee development. I think obviously we have a nice pathway for players to develop, but a lot of people are wondering what that is going to be like for coaches and referees. And a question that comes from Phil from AO Chicago asks, what do you think U.S. Soccer's role should be in helping coaches and referees become better at their craft and encourage more involvement beyond parent coaches, which is where a lot of them get their start?
Support locally. They really, U.S. Soccer should do that without a doubt. I think that's one of the things that U.S. Soccer can do and should do, is making sure that we can get more referees that can have a direct route and can climb up the ladder as far as they want. The same with coaching. I know that within certain state associations, they're already working with to try to find and allow coaching courses, as much as possible. And I think U.S. Soccer can continue to do that, to show the support, where needed, and whoever wants it, because I think it's very important that we get more referees, more coaches, more educated referees, within this game. Now that's going to have to be, and everything falls back to this, that's going to have to be with U.S. Soccer working with the local organizations, right? Because I was talking to someone today, it's like you can find a way to work with the local schools and find certain programming, work with the local police, to find programming. I can work with the local Boys and Girls Club to do coaching courses, so they can just basically get the C license, and start working through that program. And if they start learning these different things, all of a sudden they become fans of the game, and then it's that knock-on effect, right? If someone all of a sudden picks up their C license, in a local area, all of a sudden they're going to go, well, I'm not just going to sit here with it. Why don't I go out and use it? And that brings more people into the game in different areas that we may not have thought of before.
And along those lines, like when we look at some of the players that are currently playing in Major League Soccer and elsewhere, a lot of them have had more interest in becoming coaches in their post-playing career. And so you see a lot of them starting to take those courses, the licensing courses, to become coaches and become referees after their playing days are done. What resources do you think should be allocated, or at least, what further support can you lend some of these players who are trying to make that choice between what they want to do when their career is done?
Well, I have seen from over the years that I know that U.S. soccer has done some things as far as, certain athletes that have had a certain amount of years with the national team or whatnot, that they're allowed to start at a certain level. So you don't have to start at the C level or lower, that you could start at like B and get your A. And there's also like some types of financial support. And I believe there's even some things that are going on now when you talk about the National Soccer Coaches Commission. There's ways to get coaching licensing there, but there is the issue of, okay, what transfers, to one area, what works within, MLS and what doesn't. So I would love to see within U.S. soccer, because we have to remember U.S. soccer isn't MLS, it isn't USL, it isn't NWSL. U.S. soccer is the governing body. So there needs to be, even if it's put it up on the website, okay, this license gets you this, and this is where it works and where it won't. I think that's extremely important, because the last thing I want to see is, some players or individuals just spending $3-4 grand to get license and go, oh wait, it doesn't work where I want it to go. So I think that would be very helpful on U.S. soccer's part. I'd like to see that, number one, and a few of those things that I already mentioned, allowing the players, but also individuals, see if we can look for some of the most passionate, individuals within certain local communities, and see if we can find and help out and support, the different associations and clubs to kind of push those people through, or give them the financial support to take certain classes or to take, the certain courses that can help them get to where they want to be, especially on the referee side. I think that's one area that we could really focus on.
And because you're a player, you probably have this perspective of what it's like to be, training full-time, at the top of your game, and also trying to think about what the post-playing days. In the NFL, for example, you'll have a third-string quarterback who automatically will become a quarterback's coach and then an offensive coordinator very, very young, because there's no licensing, but there's that pipeline. And so do you think those pipelines are solid, or do you think they can be improved where, some guy who is playing, who's like, hey, I'm not getting a lot of playing time, but I think I have an avenue where I can probably learn the X's and O's and the tactics quick enough to become a coach?
Well, this is, we're talking, this is just the professional level that we're talking about?
It could be professional, it could be college, it could be any level, any level you want.
I would love to see if there can be some type of pipeline there where we can make it very simple of, okay, this is what you need. It's laid out for you ahead of time, and see if there are scholarship opportunities that we could put out there for individuals to find a way to get into that second career opportunity. If they are a player and they're just going, okay, this isn't working out, I still want to finish up my playing career of what it is, but I want to look into other ways to contribute, because there are 1,000 other ways to contribute to the sport than just being on the field. I think we can look at trying to find ways to support individuals when they're trying to do that. Yes, I would love to see if we can make it a pipeline along those routes. I think it's necessary so we can get qualified, I guess we like to use qualified candidates into those positions, in the future.
So we're running out of time. I do have a couple of questions for you. I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay. Mm-hmm. Last night I asked him what his favorite game was, but I'm asking you a different question because you obviously got to play in a lot of them. You're a Hall of Famer. You got to pick between children. Which is the one game that you're like, this is the best game I ever played in?
Wait, what do you mean? The best actual soccer game I've ever played in?
You could take that however you want. It would because an epic win, or because you had an epic game, or whichever way you want to take it. The best game, you're like, hey, this is, if I have to pick one game to relive for the rest of my life, it's this game.
For me, it's going to be beating Mexico in the World Cup 2-0. In that game, 2-1. That. Whoa, no,
that was 2-0. That was necessary.
Yeah, I'm getting them mixed up. It was that headshot that I took in the game. No, it would be the Mexico game, because I remember, I got to give a little bit with it, because I remember, people forget, we were struggling in that game a little bit at the beginning. And then they made a substitution, and I think they took out, was it Pardo, I believe, and then all of a sudden we were going to town. And me and a lot of other players are like, "Are you kidding me? They're taking him out. He was the one that was doing the most damage to us." And then all of a sudden we started playing. And then of course once I got in, obviously I took the headshot, and the variety of different things. Blanco tried to break my leg in the corner, all these different things. But the end result was fantastic, 2-0, and why it was so important. I think it really made a statement, within CONCACAF, that the U.S. soccer made it, beating Mexico on the biggest stage, in front of the world. It was absolutely fantastic.
And because I'm curious, obviously there's a lot of rivalries in sports, and U.S. Mexico is among the top of them. When you guys played on, if you played on a team with a player from the Mexican national team, was there that back and forth, the banter, or even just the side bets or whatever? Was there, because if Duke and UNC, they play, I went to Duke. If someone went to UNC, there's a lot of banter. Was between US and Mexico, are the players kind of going back and forth yo, we got you this time? Are you guys?
I would say yes, but it wasn't friendly banter. That's the problem. For me, in the early years, it was always me being on the right side, and on the left side, I was against Ramon Ramirez, and it was a battle nonstop. Just the two of us. It felt like track practice, back in the day. So it was definitely something crazy. But yeah, I did have some friendly banter, once, MLS started and all those things, because, I had Jorge Campos on my team. I had a lot of different Mexican national team players come through. And it's funny, there's probably even more friendly banter now, than at any other time, now that we're all retired and we kind of text each other about, this, that, or the other thing about, oh, we're going to win this time. No, and we go back and forth. So it's fantastic. Let me tell you, that's one of the great things is we played hard against each other, and we fought, tooth and nail on the field. But after, when it's all said and done, 20 odd years later, as contentious as it was on the field, we're still quite good friends.
Awesome. And so this is the point where I give it to you for a closing statement. If you have anything you want to tell them about your candidacy, where they can find out more information, if fans are looking for that, tell the world why you should be vice president.
Well, thank you for this time, and thank you for everyone that's out there listening. Look, there's a reason why I'm doing this, and it's because I want to continue to give back. I've been doing this. I've been playing on the field for quite some time, and I did quite a bit on the field, but I want to continue to do stuff off the field. And I've had years and years of giving back, to my local communities and nationally and internationally that people may not know about, working with the U.S. Soccer Foundation, working with AYSO, working with the U.S. State Department internationally, going to teach the sport, to young women, where they're not even allowed to play sports, around the world. These are some of the things, that I like to do, and it's not something where it's okay, I'm going to start doing these things over the last month, as I announce my candidacy. No, this is something that I've been doing since I retired and while I was still playing. I just want people to know that it's a passion of mine to give back. I do really want to work on the diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also that representation and access with advocacy. And I think that's the most important part, that you will get an advocate, at that level, trying to push, these different views at every level of U.S. soccer. And I feel that I have the breadth of knowledge and experience, nationally, internationally, and locally, to be able to help and make some of those changes that we want to see.
It's Cobi Jones, a Hall of Famer, guys. Cobi, I want to thank you for taking the time tonight to answer questions from our members. And of course, we all wish you the best of luck on the 27th in the election. We're looking forward to whoever wins, hopefully working alongside you guys to keep growing the game in America.
Yeah, well, and thank you for that. And as you said, whoever wins, just remember that we're all working for the better of soccer in the United States. So I appreciate all your help, and thank you for allowing me to have this time with you.
Absolutely. And for everyone out there, thanks again for joining us this evening. I know we had a couple back-to-back, so we appreciate you sticking with us. Our next VP candidate forum will be a week from tonight on February 17th at 8 p.m. That will be with Jim Sadowski from the DCVA Soccer Association. And it will also be streamed as this was tonight on AO's Facebook page. We are still working to schedule one with the final candidate, Bill Taylor. We will let you know if we can get that finalized. But until next week, for the Hall of Famer and everyone here at AO, I am Donald Wine, and enjoy the rest of your week and weekend.